Moving on now. Nonsense is how Iran's oil minister has dismissed claims made by the Saudi crown prince that the kingdom can replace Iranian oil in the global market. Bijan Zanganeh says Mohammed bin Salman's remarks can only satisfy U.S. President Donald Trump. Zanganeh says no one else can buy bin Salman's claims that such statements have no real impact on the oil market. This comes despite a November 4th deadline set by Trump to impose additional sanctions on Iran's oil and banking industries. Washington has called on companies to wind down their trade with Iran. The U.S. withdrew from the 2015 nuclear agreement back in May. Now, for more on that, we're joined by Mr. Alexander Azadigan, senior geopolitical analyst and editor-at-large with ImperialNews.com. Thank you very much, sir, once again for joining us on Press TV's Top 5. Now, what do you make of Mr. Zanganeh's comments? Do you actually believe that bin Salman's recent remarks are really nonsense, or will the Saudis be able to compensate for the lost oil if Iran has to leave the global oil market?
Thank you, Gisu, for your invitation. It's always good to be with Press TV, probably one of the last voices of sanity in this world. Well, this, of course, is not the first time that the Saudis have tried to ensure the international community that they will make up for Iran's share. But let's not forget that Iran is the third largest producer in OPEC and carries a lot of clout and say. I think Mr. Trump is trying to politicize the oil prices for his own domestic standing in our elections, midterm elections coming up in exactly 5 weeks. In many ways, this election will be a referendum on Mr. Trump's performance. And with the price of oil at $86 per barrel, people are not happy in the United States, especially in my own home state of California, where we pay the highest prices for gas. So obviously, Mr. Trump's call for output increase, at which the Saudis are indicating they would obey by pumping another extra 1.3 million barrels per day, is an attempt for two things. The first one is to keep the Saudis in check, reference to that Saudi Arabia would not last more than 2 weeks without the U.S. support that Mr. Trump made not too many days ago. And the second one is the hope that increasing the supply would drive prices down if in fact the surplus would decrease the demand, which at this time of the year, the demand always goes down due to the end of the summer high season. Of course, the Iranians would come out and state that their reduction in oil production cannot be placed by anyone. We see how steadfast, for example, India has been in purchasing the Iranian oil, regardless of Washington's threats, not to mention the recent purchase of S-400, the Russian S-400 missile systems that Indians made despite Washington's clear threat of sanctions. Of course, Mr. Trump's threats that Iran wouldn't be allowed to sell a drop of its oil falls entirely under another category. I think the global oil markets are very jittery, that if Iran's oil exports are significantly reduced, it will have a very adverse reaction regardless of what Saudi Arabia promises to do and how they always bow down to Washington for their own political survival. Having said that, one should not ignore the psyops or psychological warfare element that always has been associated with energy wars between competing countries, and in the case of Iran and Saudi Arabia, hostile nations.
Mr. Azadigan, one quick point because we're running out of time, but do you think that the Saudis actually do have the tools to compensate for the lost oil?
Well, that's an excellent question. I answered very quickly since you say you're out of time. I was especially interested by this sentence from the Iranian oil minister's statement, which was, quote, what the Saudis have been supplying the market with were not Saudi's spare capacity, but from tapping to their oil stocks, hinting the possible Saudi desperation at this moment, and also their desire to be on Washington's good side. And furthermore, if there's going to be a war, that they're going to be, they're going to have their backs. That Washington is going to have their backs. So I personally don't think they have the capacity to produce any more oil in the regular production capacity. They're actually tapping into their reserve supplies, their national reserve supplies, which hints something big could be happening in the near future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alexander Azargan, once again for joining us on Press TV.